But I was extremely sick from 2019 to 2021, in bed, lost my job, thought my life was over, and you couldn't have paid me any amount of money to tell me that today I would be a certified health coach, helping support others living with migraine and headache conditions at Mind Plus Neurology. It's such an honor to do what I do to help people find hope in their own illness. And I'm living proof that it's possible to live well with migraine. And I'm also living proof that taking a holistic approach to your health can be effective, and we can utilize holistic approaches alongside more Western medicine, pharmaceutical approaches as well. So I think we can move on, Tracy, to the next slide. And I just wanted to share that making healthy choices doesn't have to be difficult. Um, it's easier when you know what to look for. It can feel so overwhelming when you're starting from square one. And the good news is that I'm here to help. So, as a member of Mind Plus Neurology, you receive a free initial health coaching session with me. And I'm here to guide you through all the things that we'll be talking about today in a lot more depth on a one on one basis. So we can sit together and talk about what your goals are around health and nutrition, or what any of your health related goals are, and come up with a strategy for success. So feel free to give our office a call, and a care coordinator can help set you up with a no charge health coaching consultation. So then we're going to move on and talk about food and migraine, what to eat, how to do it, why it's important. And first, I just wanted to share that migraine is not your fault. Migraine attacks are often due to many different factors. And on the next slide, we'll talk about migraine threshold theory. So let's talk about that. It can also be called bucket theory. And there's an awesome graphic here. I happen to also be a volunteer for Migraine World Summit social media team, and I pulled this graphic from our social media page. This is kind of an intro to threshold theory. So you can see that food and diet triggers and dehydration are one of the things listed here. So I like to explain it kind of in the bucket theory way, where I was talking to Tracy yesterday about this. When you kind of go to a water park and you see those big buckets filling up with water, and then eventually it fills up and it topples over and it spills all over all the kids. That's kind of that's kind of the idea behind the bucket theory. So when you take all of these different things, stress, you didn't get a good night of sleep, you are dehydrated, and then the barometric pressure changes. That might be that combination of things might be what set you off and triggered a migraine attack. It's very, very rarely just one thing. And I think when it comes to food specifically, we can kind of get stuck and think that, oh, I ate that one thing and that's what gave me a migraine attack. But we aren't always considering the other things that could potentially be contributing as well, like lack of sleep or stress, things like that. So it's also important to remember that the majority of us have a genetic predisposition to migraine. We were born having this higher likelihood of being triggered and getting migraine attacks. And that is not your fault. Having this predisposition genetically to migraine is not your fault. And even if you do eat a trigger food, or a food that you have even personally identified as a food that triggers you, let's say red wine. Even if you do consume that and you end up getting a migraine attack, it can be so easy to blame ourselves or even gaslight ourselves and say, it's my fault, I caused this. We are allowed to live our lives despite having this chronic illness. And it's just important to remember that this disease is not your fault. Even if you do eat something that triggers you, it's a learning experience, right? I like to think of it like that. And just want to again hit home that food is not the only trigger for migraine. All of these different things that are listed here and more, all of us are so unique in what can trigger us. Um, Food is not the only trigger. And I hope that this was helpful in kind of explaining that there are so many different factors that contribute to migraine and headache. And again, it is not your fault. So let's move into talking about some of the commonly reported food and migraine triggers. So I just want to stress that common does not mean guaranteed. Everyone living with migraine is so very unique, and some people have absolutely no food triggers at all. And I have met people that have no food triggers at all. And that is very possible for us. And there is a possibility that some of these foods on this list are triggers for you, and maybe you have identified them or you haven't. Um, but we're going to talk about some of the commonly reported food triggers, such as high sugar foods. We'll talk a little bit later in the workshop about hyper and hypoglycemia and how that can affect migraine. Artificial sweeteners, this is kind of a pretty commonly known one. Aspartame, sucralose, erythritol. Actually, there was just a study released, I believe in 2022, about erythritol being linked to heart attack, I believe. We know that migraine is in part, a disease of our vascular system, right? And so that is something to take into consideration when we are reading ingredient labels, is looking for things like artificial sweeteners that can contribute to potentially triggering a migraine attack. I briefly touched already on alcohol, particularly red wine and beer seem to be the most common triggers. Um, and I also just wanted to point out that alcohol is a known neurotoxin. It's very dehydrating. It's high in sulfites and histamine, which are also commonly reported migraine triggers, and caffeine, which we'll talk about in depth in the next slide. So coffee, soda, energy drinks, tea, chocolate, even over-the-counter medications like Excedrin can have caffeine in them, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Aged cheeses, cured meats, and smoked fish, and the idea behind both of those is that tyramine and histamine can build up in these foods, and they're kind of and there's some science behind this showing how they can contribute towards triggering headaches and migraines, as well as monosodium glutamate or MSG. And MSG is a really tricky one. It can be listed on ingredient labels as monosodium glutamate, exactly how it's spelled out on this slide. It can also be listed on ingredient labels under many different names, such as yeast extract, spices. Pea protein is a type of MSG. It's really high in glutamate. Carrageenan is in a lot of like processed meats and dairy products, and ultra pasteurized dairy products can also be really high in glutamate. Another one to look for is natural flavors, which if you open your cupboard and look at ingredient labels, which we'll talk a lot more about in just a few minutes here, natural flavors are found in everything these days. And it's kind of known in the migraine community that if it's a natural flavor and it's a sweet food, it's probably not MSG. It could be, but if it's natural flavors and it's a savory food, it's typically savory foods that have MSG added to them. And within those natural flavors, companies are not required to disclose what natural flavors are. A natural flavor could indeed mean juice from a strawberry. Natural flavors can also mean chemicals created in a laboratory, and it can also include vanilla flavoring can be derived from the anal gland of beavers. So we really don't know what we're getting unless we like reach out to these companies and specifically ask them what's in their natural flavors, or just avoid natural flavors as often as you can. And we'll talk about the importance of eating whole foods and real foods, and how you don't have to read an ingredient label when it comes to whole foods and real foods because they don't have one. It's just one single ingredient, right? I also wanted to add here that I personally have a migraine trigger of raw onion. It's been a trigger of mine for years, even sometimes just like when I can eat cooked onions generally. Sometimes if there's a lot, it will trigger me too. But even if we're adding onion to a homemade dish, I'll ask my husband to cut it and clean it up, and I'll leave the room because even just being in the room with the scent of the raw onion can be really triggering for me. So just another reminder that we are all unique. This list of commonly reported food related migraine triggers is not all inclusive, and it is not applicable to every single person. We are all unique. So, if you're willing to share in the chat what migraine food triggers you have personally identified for yourself, I'd love I'd love to hear more about that. Or if anyone would like to speak up and talk about that, that would be great too. If not, and if anyone wants to share in the chat, we can wait on that. But let's move along to caffeine since we've already talked a little bit about that.
Sure.
So caffeine can be both helpful and harmful. It can be helpful for some because during a migraine attack, it can help relieve a migraine attack. Going back to the Excedrin, having caffeine in that ingredient list for that over-the-counter medication, many patients report that the combination of the caffeine, um, aspirin, and what's the third one? Acetaminophen? I'm forgetting the combination of 3. I'm actually in the midst of a migraine attack right now. I got a migraine at, like, 3:30 today, so bear with me. Um, but some people report that caffeine can be really helpful in helping to relieve an attack. Um, when it comes to caffeine, really kind of one of the most important things is to be consistent with it. A lot of times people will rush around in the morning, get ready for work, grab their cup of coffee, run out the door, maybe have a cup or 2 more when they're at the office. And then on the weekends, they sleep in and they don't need that coffee necessarily to get going or to help motivate them to get their work done for the day. And the migraine brain really, really likes consistency. So if you are a coffee drinker and want to continue to remain a coffee drinker, just just reminding yourself that that consistency is really important, and having too much caffeine or not enough, the withdrawal, both of those could potentially be triggers for us. So being consistent Monday through Sunday and having the same amount of coffee every day is really important. And then um, I knew that this was true, but I did a little bit of research and learned that more than 100 milligrams daily, so that's 1 cup of coffee, it's a known risk factor for daily headache. And I'm raising my hand because I used to drink a lot of coffee. I do actually believe that the overconsumption of caffeine is something that pushed me into this chronic, daily, intractable migraine that I've been in now for 4 years. Um, while my condition is significantly better than it was, I still have a ways to go in my healing, and I do believe that coffee and caffeine was a big part of that for me. And really, at the end of the day, caffeine is a drug, right? It's a nervous system stimulant 100% of the time. And because those of us with migraine are already living with hypersensitive nervous systems, I think we should really strongly consider that when choosing whether or not caffeine is the best choice for us. So, do we get anything in the chat, Tracy?
Nope, we're all
Okay.
not yet.
Okay. No problem. So, moving along, what should we be eating? So, we talked about things to avoid or things to be cautious of. And now I'd like to talk about what we should be eating. So, yep, you're on the right slide, Tracy. Perfect. So, really, what we should be eating are real whole foods. And I first, before I talk about everything that's listed on this slide, I like to talk to, and I like to live personally with kind of this ancestral eating mindset always in the back of my mind. And I like to just put this in the minds of my patients because it's not something we often think about. It's certainly not talked about in mainstream health and media is this idea of ancestral eating. And so ancestral eating is defined as consuming the whole, unprocessed, unrefined, local, in season, organic foods of our direct ancestors. So really, it's about eating like your grandparents and your great grandparents were eating. So, um, our great grandparents, for example, certainly did not have Walmart supermarkets where they could go and get food from all over the country, all over the world. These super highly processed foods that come in bags and packages. Um, our grandparents were eating a lot of what's listed on this slide here, and that is grass-fed, pasture-raised, wild-caught animal proteins, and the difference between those and the more conventional animal proteins that we are often consuming, almost always in restaurants and also from the grocery store, are these, like, factory farmed cows and chickens. Even if you and, um we'll talk a little bit about eggs, for example. Pasture raised or pastured or organic eggs are much better for us. They have a much more effective omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. We want more omega-3s and omega-6s, and uh, chickens that have been fed a processed grain-heavy diet, they're genetically modified grains, they're sprayed heavily with pesticides, they're a lot higher in omega-6s, which are more inflammatory for our body. And our ancestors, like, they didn't even have to think about this stuff, right? Like, they had a farm, they had chickens of their own that were eating the bugs and the seeds and things that are part of their natural environment. They didn't have to think about any of this. And it's unfortunate that we have to really think so much about how to eat healthy. But I like to just think about it from this ancestral point of view because it just helps simplify things for me. And when I've done my own research on this ancestral eating, it's just very clear what what our ancestors evolutionarily for thousands, tens of thousands of years have been consuming, and our bodies just did not evolve as quickly as our food has evolved, and our bodies don't know how to process and break down these highly processed foods, right? So, I always like to talk about eating organic fruits and vegetables if you're able to afford it. Aldi is amazing for organic fruits and vegetables. They also carry grass-fed beef, and I want to say they might have pasture-raised chicken, but don't quote me on that. I don't think I saw that when I was there last time, but I did 100% see grass-fed beef at a very reasonable price, like 6.99, 7.99 a pound maybe. Um, But our ancestors, of course, also were not eating pineapple in the middle of winter in Wisconsin, right? Not to say not to eat pineapple because pineapple is very nutrient dense. It's very good for us, certainly. But um, if you've ever had a session with me or you have a session with me, I surely will be talking about circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is something that is really important for our health in the sense that it regulates our sleep, it regulates our digestive, it regulates so much of our it regulates every single enzymatic, biological, physiological process in our body. And our biological clock runs on a 24-hour clock and also a seasonal clock. And so if we're eating fruit in the middle of winter, it might be more difficult for our body to digest that. Think about how we kind of automatically, at least for me, I crave watermelon in summer. I don't really crave watermelon in winter. I crave soup and I crave like root vegetables and squashes and things like that in the fall and the winter. And we'll talk a little bit about intuitive eating, but it's so important to listen to your body and really tune into what your body is craving. It might make a lot of sense as far as your circadian rhythm and eating things that are in season. Obviously, if you can buy things from a local farmer's market, not only are you helping the local economy and supporting local farmers and taking money away from big agriculture, which is harming our environment and our soil in a big way. Um, it's going to be beneficial for your health too, because we'll talk about microbiome in a little bit, but eating local fruits and vegetables from the soil in your local area can really support a healthy microbiome. And um, eating ancient grains, one of my favorites is quinoa. I eat quinoa a lot. I love quinoa. I replace it kind of as I would use rice. And it's really high in protein also, which is fabulous. And raw dairy can be controversial because it's illegal to be sold in Wisconsin, the dairy state, which is very ironic. I traveled to California recently and was able to buy raw dairy right in the store. It was amazing. There are local farms that you can do like cow shares, and you technically own part of the cow, so you can drink the milk from the cow. It's just illegal to be sold in retail in Wisconsin. And raw dairy is 50 to 100% more nutrient dense when you break down the different nutrients and vitamins in the dairy. Some are 50% more, and some are even 100% more. One of the reasons why we often have an issue processing dairy is because we are lactose intolerant. We hear that often, right? Well, part of the pasteurization and homogenization process in conventional milk that you'd buy in the store, it breaks down the lactase, which is an enzyme that breaks down the lactose that's in the milk. And drinking raw dairy, it that lactase is in the milk. It breaks down that lactose for you, even if you don't possess that enzyme in your body to break that down. Drinking raw dairy or eating raw cheese from dairy, it has that lactase in it and can break it down for you. You may actually be able to tolerate raw dairy better than you can conventional store-bought pasteurized homogenized dairy. And then last but not least, electrolytes. And electrolytes are basically salts. So salts along with water help to keep our electrical charge in our body working properly, and that's hence the name electrolytes. It supports that electrical charge. So the common electrolytes are sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and phosphorus. And water acts as a carrier for the electrolytes. Our body can't make electrolytes on our own. That's why it's so important that we get them from our diet. And I was actually once told by a doctor that I was drinking too much water, too much plain water. I was instructed to start drinking more electrolytes or adding salt to my water. Um, I love the brand Real Salt, Real Salt. You can find it at a lot of traditional grocery stores now. If you go to like a local health food store or Whole Foods, you'll almost always find it at those stores. Um, but just a couple sprinkles of real salt in your water, natural electrolytes. Otherwise, the same brand that makes real salt Redmond. They make a brand of electrolytes that I really like called Relight. Some health food stores carry them, and you can also get that online as well. There's other brands that you can buy as well that are really easy to find, like Liquid IV, although that's a little bit higher in sugar. Um, and like LMNT is a or Element is a big one that I get advertisements for all the time on social media. Um, but yeah, this is kind of what we should be eating, and we're going to talk a little bit about next how to take the stress out of eating well with migraine. So, first, I just want to say that this can feel really overwhelming. In fact, when I first kind of started my own holistic healing journey with migraine, diet was kind of the first thing that I took on. And I was really overwhelmed. And I wish that I had the resources and the knowledge that I do now back in 2019 when I got really sick, because I probably would have taken a bit of a different approach. In fact, I know I would have taken a bit of a different approach. Um, if your approach to diet has you feeling stressed out, obsessive, anxious, socially isolated, and fearing food, stop. We should not be fearing food. We should not be feeling so stressed and so obsessive and so anxious and not going out to eat with friends or family because we're afraid that we might trigger a migraine attack. The stress itself, I believe there was a study that showed that over 80% of people living with migraine report stress as their number one trigger. And I believe that for myself. I know that when I am stressed out, I am there's a higher likelihood of me experiencing a migraine attack. And stressing out about what to eat has far more negative implications for your migraine condition than any food could. And a lot of times we're thinking about what we shouldn't eat, what we shouldn't eat, what we shouldn't eat, right? And having a diverse diet is really, really important for a lot of reasons, especially supporting our gut microbiome. Our gut brain connection is so important. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I just want to remind you that if you're feeling stressed out, get the support of someone like a certified health coach, a nutritionist, a dietitian, your doctor. Um, because we shouldn't be feeling so stressed about this. It shouldn't be that hard. So, first, I think it's really important for us to, as difficult as it can be with migraine when we're not feeling well, embrace home cooking. And when I say embrace home cooking, I mean try to make it fun. Cook with a partner or a friend or a family member, listen to music, dance. If there's one skill that we absolutely need to be healthy and well, it is to learn how to cook our own food. And sadly and very frustratingly, as children, we weren't taught this in school. I mean, I had like a couple classes where we like baked cookies or something, but like nothing tangible, nothing that actually taught me how to prepare meals for myself for like I have to make dinner every day for the rest of my life. I know you feel what I feel when I say that. It can feel so exhausting, but I really encourage you to find ways to make cooking fun. And the Dizzy Cook, she does some online cooking classes, and there are endless options for cooking classes on YouTube for free. Um, One of my favorite tips that I like to give everyone that has been an absolute game changer for me personally is batch preparing and freezing leftovers. So, for example, I made sloppy joes this week and I doubled the recipe. So it's just my husband and I. We made 2 pounds of ground beef. We probably ate half a pound and have a pound and a half left over that I freezed into half-pound portions. So I have 3 separate portions. Now I have 3 meals frozen in my freezer that I can pull out, stick in the microwave, or throw on the stovetop in a pot, heat up. All I need are some buns. I'll make maybe some steamed veggies in the microwave, and I can have a balanced meal in minutes. And that batch preparing and freezing is just such a really, really helpful thing because when we're feeling unwell, the last thing we want to do is be upright in the kitchen preparing meals for ourselves, right? So, um, batch preparing and freezing has been hugely helpful. And there are tons of tips online that you can get as well. And I'd be happy to, in a one on one session, support you with that as well. Um, Also, I wanted to add that with the batch preparing and the freezing of the meals, instead of putting them in the fridge, tyramine and histamine are naturally occurring chemicals in certain foods, especially in protein heavy foods that tend to increase as foods ripen or age. So think of a banana. When it's green, it's not ripe yet, right? It's really it's new. It's not soft and yellow. As it starts turning more yellow and then getting browner, the histamine and the tyramine are building up in that food item, and tyramine and histamine are both understood to be potential migraine triggers in some people. So that's why I like to recommend that people freeze meals instead of refrigerating them, because when you freeze it, the tyramine and histamine are going to build up at a snail's pace comparatively to when it's in the refrigerator and kind of spoiling more and more every single hour and every single day until you eat it. So, moving on to smart shopping. Um, when it comes to shopping in the grocery store for healthy foods, oftentimes the healthiest foods at like your Walmart supermarket or a Kroger store like Pick and Save or Mariano's around here. Um, the tops and the bottoms of the shelves, the far ends of the sections. So let's say peanut butter, the ends of those sections, the top shelf and the bottom shelf, often that's where the healthiest choices are. The Jifs and the Peter Pans of the world, they're paying Kroger and Walmart big money to be on this middle of the shelf, right at eye level. And these other products that they don't care about marketing, they truly care about health and they care about their ingredients and the quality of their food. They're not paying for that prime real estate in grocery stores. And they can kind of be harder to find because they almost are hidden in the grocery stores because you have to look way up or way on the bottom shelf or way on the far ends to find those healthier options. And once you start kind of being aware of that, you'll start noticing brands and options that you didn't even realize existed before. I'll never forget that time in my life where I started discovering all these different brands and foods that I didn't even realize existed, that the ingredient lists were significantly, significantly shorter. So, as far as analyzing ingredient labels goes, first and foremost, don't let the claims on the front of the packages fool you. In fact, if there's a health claim on the front of the package, there's a really good chance that it's just a marketing scheme and that food, you might want to avoid that food. So examples include light or natural. Natural means nothing from FDA standards. Anyone with any food, they could put natural on the front of an Oreo package, and there are no regulations about that whatsoever. So light, natural, low fat, low carb, claims like that on the fronts of food packages are generally marketing schemes. And um, there's it's interesting because the actual companies that don't care about marketing, they don't put claims like that on the fronts of their packages, and their foods are healthier generally. So just be really aware of that. And um, when it comes to looking at the back of the package and looking at the label, the serving sizes, they might be misleading and unrealistic. As far as manufacturers often list a much smaller amount than what most people consume in one sitting. So, like, A serving size might be a quarter of a cookie. Who eats a quarter of I'm gonna eat the whole cookie, and all of a sudden, now realize I've eaten over 500 calories, and, you know, a half a can of soda might be a serving size. A lot of times we think if it's in a package, that's a whole serving. That is what I should be eating in one sitting, and that's not always the case. But most importantly is the ingredients themselves. So when you're reading an ingredient list, products list ingredients by quantity. So the very first item listed, there's the highest amount of that item in that food product. And the very last item listed, there's the lowest amount of that food item in that product. So, if the ingredient list is super long, if you can't pronounce or haven't heard of something on the list, it's probably best to avoid that food item. That's kind of a simple rule that I like to tell people is if you have not heard of something or you can't pronounce it, perhaps it's not edible. Perhaps it shouldn't be edible. The reality is that the FDA does not regulate ingredients in foods. As much as we would like to believe that they are protecting our health and making sure what we're eating is safe, they are not. And the FDA actually trusts these big companies like Kraft and General Mills and these big companies that own 90% of what we're shopping for in a grocery store. There's like 8 CEOs that own 90% of what's in any traditional grocery store. Um, They are allowed to legally create chemicals in a laboratory, put them in food, and the FDA trusts that what they're putting in the food is safe. No studies are submitted to the government to review for health or safety. And that's why it's absolutely imperative that we are the best advocates for ourselves and are knowledgeable about these things when it comes to the food that we're eating because the organizations that we're told are supposed to care about our health, they simply do not. So, the easiest kind of way to go about analyzing ingredient labels or lists is if it's super long, if it's like more than 10 items long, it's more of a food-like item than an actual food at that point. And if you can't pronounce or haven't heard of something on the list, maybe Google it. Learn for yourself what that ingredient item is. And the likelihood is that it's probably best to avoid that food item altogether. I also wanted to point out something that many people are not aware of. Seed oils like sunflower oil, safflower oil, canola oil, they are extremely inflammatory. In fact, there are many health specialists recently that are making claims that it's these seed oils that are causing our obesity epidemic in our country and in our world. Um, Sunflower, safflower, canola specifically are in almost everything, and 99% of restaurants use these oils. Why do you ask? Because they're significantly cheaper. They're significantly cheaper than the extra virgin olive oils, the avocado oils, the coconut oils, which are much healthier for us. And of course, whole foods like an apple or ground beef, there is no ingredient label, right? Because that food is a whole food, a real food in and of itself, and it doesn't require an ingredient label. So those are always the best foods to choose. And that's pretty much as easy as it comes, right? Go to your produce section or your, you know, butcher meat section in your grocery store and those whole foods are always going to be your best choice. Notice I didn't talk really about calories because and that goes against everything that we've been taught, especially women in the 90s. Calories were everything, right? That's where light food came from. Um, when we're eating real whole food, calories are almost irrelevant. Obviously, we should always have moderation and enjoy the cookie or the cake. By all means, I'm never gonna tell you not to, or the gelato. I'm having some gelato tonight, um, after this talk. But calories are so unimportant when it comes to the big scheme of what we are putting into our bodies and managing migraine. Calories are the least important thing. Eating real food, knowing what you're actually putting into your body, learning how to read ingredient labels are far, far more important for our long-term health, our short-term health, and managing migraine. So, last but not least, on the go, and I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel. We talked a lot about this in our holiday wellness workshop back in November, I believe it was. Um, but when you're on the go, um, Quick Trip, for example, which is everywhere in Wisconsin, and grocery stores have these sections generally as well, where you can get like pre-made hard-boiled eggs, fruit cups, veggies and dip, string cheese. Those are whole foods, right? Choosing items like that are always going to be the best choice for you. I like to personally, like, have a personal cooler with me and just pack these items at home because and bring them with me when I know I'm gonna be on the go and might need to have a snack or something. Because again, having a consistent eating routine is super important, just like we talked about with caffeine. Being consistent with your meal times is super important because our migraine brains like consistency. So, these are all items that you can easily pack at home and bring with you, and you'll save a lot of money, quite honestly, if you pack it from home and aren't swinging through. But that's not always an option, right? Sometimes we have to stay late at work, or we had to pick up our kid late, or whatever, and we need to swing through somewhere and grab something. And again, if you're gonna feel really stressed out about the food that you're eating, it's gonna be more triggering than actually the food itself. So if you need to eat and be consistent with eating, go through a drive-through. Just get something. Eating something is better than nothing when it comes to migraine. Being consistent is more important than eating nothing. So sometimes we have to go through a drive-through and just use your intuition. Make a choice that feels good for you and isn't going to stress you out because again, that stress is gonna be more conducive to producing a migraine attack than the actual food that you're eating itself. And then next slide, um, you may have heard of intuitive eating, and what I mean by that is a few of the principles include like ditching the diet mentality and making peace with food. It's kind of what I've been talking about with the stress, right? Like just eat the food because the stress is more harmful for our health than the food itself. Honoring your hunger fullness is really the key for me when it comes to intuitive eating and has really played a huge role in my weight loss journey. I weighed nearly 100 pounds more than I weigh now, and I did so many diets and failed. And honoring my hunger and fullness using a scale of 1 to 10, I do this before I eat, in about the middle of my meal, and at the end of my meal. I will check in with myself and ask myself on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is I am not hungry at all. I am totally satisfied. 10 is bursting at the seams. You feel physically ill. You're so full. You are sick to your stomach. Um, so if you're kind of checking in with yourself and learning what your own personal hunger and fullness feels like, that's part of intuitive eating, and I think is really important because for so many years, at least for me personally, I was taught to, count calories and rely on these outside sources to tell me what is enough. And we should be able to listen to our own bodies to know what feels good for us, right? So, um, and then I love this one, challenge the food police, saying no to thoughts in your head that declare you're good for eating fewer calories, for example, or that you're bad because you ate a piece of chocolate cake. You are not good or bad for any of those reasons. You are a human being. And you are just eating food to survive, right? So challenging the food police, saying no to those thoughts can be really, really helpful too. So, when it comes to supporting your nervous system, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. Um, Actually, we'll just talk about that in a few minutes. When it comes to migraine diets, there are a few different options. The ketogenic diet, I'm sure all of us have heard of by now. It kind of aims to put our bodies into a state of ketosis where your body uses fat as energy instead of carbohydrates. And so, ketones have an anti-inflammatory effect, and it has been shown to be beneficial for migraine. Um, However, this can cause a lot of stress, this diet. Same thing with Whole30, um, and that's eating whole real foods, but for 30 days, I would encourage you to eat whole foods the majority of the time if you're able. The Mediterranean diet. Alicia Wolf, who's pictured here, the Dizzy Cook, she just released a new cookbook with Dr. Shin Bei, a neurologist in Texas, on the Mediterranean diet and eating Mediterranean for brain health. There's a lot of research that shows that the Mediterranean diet can be really beneficial for brain health. I personally love this approach. I think it's a much healthier approach. Um, but there's also opportunity to practice a migraine elimination diet to determine what your personal migraine food triggers are. Migraine elimination diets and even ketogenic Whole30 are really recommended only for people who have a really healthy relationship with food, no history of eating disorders, including restricting and binging. Um, but the elimination diet is generally like a low tyramine diet. So the example I gave about the freezing and the refrigerating, that tyramine that builds up on food, this is kind of the premise of that diet. And the Dizzy Cookbook blog the Dizzy Cook blog and her cookbooks are an amazing resource for you if you'd like to learn more about the Heal Your Headache Elimination Diet. I would highly recommend that you do a diet like that with the support of a professional to support you along the way. And again, if your approach to diet has you feeling stressed, anxious, obsessive, socially isolated, stop and just eat real food. I did want to share, actually, Tracy, if you're able to throw in the chat. I've had a couple patients ask me about, like, what kind of things do you recommend having at home in your pantry or in your refrigerator? And this is a link for pantry staples that the Dizzy Cook put together. I really love this link. It's a lot of it are really great brands that I respect. They put really nice ingredients in their food. They really care about the quality of their food. So take a look at that. I hope that that resource can be helpful for you. So moving on to, why does this matter for migraine? Again, consistency is key. Consistent meal and snack times, consistently balanced meals and snacks. Um, the gut-brain connection, researchers are finding evidence that our GI system that lacks a diverse microbiome, which is bacteria in our gut. There's actually more bacteria in our gut than there are cells in our body, billions of bacteria in our gut. These bacteria send signals to our brain, signals to our central nervous system, and having uh, a microbiome, a dysbiosis, having an unhealthy or a lack of diverse microbiome can contribute to headache and migraine. So that's why eating a diverse diet with lots of colors, so think of all the colors of the rainbow, um, proteins, fats, veggies and fruits. Having a diverse diet can help diversify our microbiome and support that gut-brain connection. I could do a whole talk just on gut-brain connection and a diverse microbiome, so maybe we'll table that for another time. Um, but blood sugar balance, hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, and hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar, both of those things can trigger migraine. So, I've actually found both for myself. If I don't eat enough, Again, that's where the consistency comes in. My blood sugar will get too low and I'll start feeling headachy. I'll start getting a migraine attack. And same thing when we like haven't eaten in a few hours and then we like shovel down some cookies. Our blood sugar very quickly rises and that can um, trigger shifts in our hormones, such as epinephrine and norepinephrine. And that hormonal shift can trigger a migraine as well. So, eating balanced meals with protein, fat, and carbohydrates, fruits and veggies is really important. Having that balanced meal um, to support healthy blood sugar levels. And then this is the nervous system part that I was talking about. And this is like one of the easiest things that you can do to help support your body when it comes to digesting food. And that is taking 10 deep belly breaths right before you're going to eat. Our bodies, especially people with chronic migraine, people who are working a lot, who have high stress jobs, lives, kids, go, go, go lifestyles, we are often stuck in states of fight or flight. And it's really important to get our body into a state of rest and digest, or that's our parasympathetic nervous system, to be able to properly digest the food that we're consuming. So by just sitting, and I like to put like both my hands on my chest or one hand on my chest and one hand on my belly or both hands on my belly and take deep, deep belly breaths, 10 of them before you eat, can help set your body up for success in ways that we don't often think about, but can help support digestion. Also, properly chewing your food can really help support digestion and having a healthy microbiome as well. So maybe counting to 20, always chewing each bite 20 times, or just eating really mindfully and really tuning into what the texture of the food is, the flavor, the scent of the food, and really being present with your food and chewing it really intentionally can help set your body up for success and can help support migraine as well. So, you have got this. Navigating diet and nutrition, navigating food can be really tough, but it gets a lot easier when you know what to look for and when you have the support, right? So, again, some kind of key takeaways: consistency is key. Go with your gut. If it's causing you stress, if it's causing you anxiety and obsession, don't do it. Just eat the food. Eating the avocado or the banana is better than avoiding it and being so fearful of it, because that stress is so much more harmful for our bodies and triggering for migraine than the avocado or the banana are. You know your body better than anyone in the world. You know your body better than any medical professional, no matter how many years they have studied health. You are the own expert on your body. And even if you do eat something that triggers an attack, don't blame yourself. Migraine is never your fault. You live with a neurological disease of the brain. You did not cause this attack to happen. And then again, um, as a Mind Plus member, you are eligible to receive one-on-one health coaching as part of your membership. I'd love to get to know you and help set you up for success when it comes not only to food and nutrition, but all aspects of health and life. Food and nutrition is just a small part of what I do, something I'm really passionate about, but just a small part. And I'd love to set up an initial session with you. I'm here to help. So give our clinic a call and talk to one of our patient success coordinators, and we can get you set up for a one-on-one consult. Well, I hope that you were able to learn something and take something away from this. And I would love to meet with you in person or virtually through Mind Plus in a free initial consult. So feel free again to give the clinic a call and get set up with that. And thank you, Suzette. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a great night.